Will come to order. This hearing is fully virtual, so we need to address a few housekeeping matters. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. The chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition. If I notice when you are recognized that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. We will begin with the chair and ranking member, then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. We are using the 5-minute clock, which you will notice on the screen. It will show how much time is remaining. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. Regarding adding extraneous or additional material to the record per House rules, we've set up an email address where members can send anything they wish to submit for the record. After seeking recognition for its inclusion, that email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Finally, we are doing 2 panels today. First, the Architect of the Capitol, then the Government Publishing Office. We will take approximately a 10-minute recess between the panels, but we will remain on this video feed, so members do not have to log off. For our first panel, we'll also be juggling votes as well. For our first panel, I'd like to welcome the Architect of the Capitol, the Honorable Brett Blanton, to present the fiscal year 2022 budget request. Mr. Blanton, this is the second time you've testified before the subcommittee in 3 weeks. We welcome you back. For fiscal year 2022, the AOC is requesting an increase of $181.4 million in appropriated funds and 94 new full-time equivalent employees over what was provided last year. While we understand that your workload is increasing, I'm afraid that the subcommittee allocation may not be increasing at a reciprocal rate. Additionally, I understand that the fiscal year 2022 budget request does not include requirements to address the necessary physical, security, and landscape architecture changes that are as a result of the domestic terrorist attack on the Capitol. I hope you can touch on those needs in your testimony today. I also would like to expand on your quote unquote big rocks initiatives during our hearing today. Specifically, I hope you will address the Capitol Complex Master Plan and how this strategic plan has changed in response to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. I look forward to your testimony. We appreciate your work very much. You've been shed a lot of light on a lot of the different scenarios that we've had to deal with over the past few weeks, Mr. Blanton, and I want to personally thank you for being very accessible to us here at this committee. At this point, I would like to yield to my colleague and friend from the Evergreen State, the nation's leading producer of apples, and is the home of the coffee chain Starbucks, the ranking member, Jamie Herrera Butler, for any opening comments you may have.
Thank you. And I should add, Mr. Chairman, that my specific district is home to Sasquatch. So don't forget that.
Excellent. Good to know.
And Fabio and the filming of Twilight. But anyway, Mr. Blanton, January was a difficult month for the Cannon House office building construction crew. Shutdowns from January 6th, the inauguration, COVID-19, all resulted in significant delays. And these factors collectively place, I'm jumping into questions. That's one of the things I want to ask you about. Not just Cannon, but Rayburn and everything in terms of the master plan that has been being worked on for a number of years now. I'm in the very far corner of Rayburn, and our quadrant has been, I feel like every week it's in a new place. And after January 6th, it all changed. I'm very anxious to hear about the master plan, about coordination with the task force recommendations from General Honore, and what we see coming out of the Senate in terms of recommendations. Obviously, you've been with us now, I think a little over a year, and you had a big job before. With everything that's come full circle in the last couple of months, I think everything's been a little bit more complicated. So I'm really interested in hearing about how your budget request incorporates some of these challenges. I know we had talked about making whole some other budgets under your purview that you had to move money around to pay for things like the fence and some of the ongoing security costs. But I'm really interested to hear from you about these things, and probably we'll have some questions along that line as well. So it's a pleasure to have you. We're grateful for the job you and your team do. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from Ohio.
The gentlelady, is Chairwoman DeLauro on the call?
She is not.
She is not? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Bland, without objection, your written testimony will be made part of the record. Please summarize your statement for the members of the committee. Once you have finished your statement, we will move to the question and answers. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Ryan. Thank you, Ranking Member and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to present the Architect of the Capitol's fiscal year 22 budget request for $865 million. It's been a whirlwind year since I last sat before you, only a few weeks into my tenure as the 12th Architect of the Capitol. In that time, I've been amazed by the level of commitment and professionalism displayed by my staff. We have been in pandemic operations for nearly a year. We supported 3 lying-in-state or honor ceremonies. We survived a building breach on January 6th, and we successfully prepared and supported the presidential inauguration. Last year, when I testified before the committee, I committed to conducting a top-down assessment of the agency to identify the most urgent needs and address critical issues. The agency's FY22 budget request is a result of that review and serves as the beginning of the transformation of the Architect of the Capitol into a world-class service agency. Additionally, this budget serves as the foundation for the future of the Capitol campus. This request introduces several new initiatives that will address many of the most critical needs of the AOC and the Capitol community, including committing ourselves to long-term planning and developing strategies that will prepare the Capitol campus for the next century. This budget also reinforces my commitment to AOC's employees by developing a human capital strategy that will bolster our efforts to acquire, develop, train, and retain a talented, diverse, and highly skilled workforce that is prepared for the future. We aim to transform the AOC's human capital landscape by ensuring workforce readiness, closing skills gaps, maximizing employees' talents, and deliberate succession planning. As I mentioned in our hearing last month, our commitment towards ensuring adequate measures are taken to mitigate the threat of COVID across the campus has not been met with the required funding and financial support. Other than our initial installment of funds, which is fully obligated, AOC has been forced to use critical infrastructure and security funding projects to support Congress at service levels required for enhanced cleaning and to acquire necessary personal protective equipment. Maintaining vigilant and strict adherence to COVID-19 protocols, the AOC has successfully continued to facilitate operations and deliver quality projects to Congress and our legislative and judicial branch partners. The agency's FY22 budget request seeks to continue this progress by addressing over $78 million in deferred maintenance needs across campus. It also invests nearly $90 million in projects that renew or improve aging infrastructure, such as fire alarms, campus intrusion, ADA compliance, environmental systems, and electrical distribution. AOC's risk-based project prioritization process identified $171.5 million for capital projects. Of this, 92.7 or 54% are projects that did not receive funding in FY21. These projects include the failed waterproofing system for the Cannon Capitol Tunnel. Water infiltration has caused staining on the walls and unsafe conditions for pedestrians. If not funded, the tunnel conditions will continue to deteriorate, require additional water management intervention, and be more expensive and more disruptive during construction. The agency is also requesting funding for critical utility distribution projects at the Capitol Power Plant and offsite facilities. Funding is required for phase 5 of the refrigeration plant revitalization program, which will replace 40-year-old piping and provide other additions to bring the older West refrigeration plant equipment up to date. Earlier this year, a chilled water pipe broke and spilled over 200,000 gallons of water a day and impacted servers in congressional recording studio spaces. Phase 5 of this project is imperative to prevent a complete shutdown of various congressional operations if another pipe breaks. Off campus, we need to replace aging units with dual use, energy efficient units within the data centers to reduce risk of interruption to daily operations, reduce energy consumption, and reduce our carbon footprint. We are seeking to address critical upgrades to life safety systems across campus. Fire alarm and sprinkler system upgrades at the U.S. Capitol, Botanic Gardens, and the James Madison Memorial Building will address code deficiencies, reduce the risk of system failure, and improve facility safety for building occupants. Finally, as we continue to assess the Capitol's future facilities needs in the aftermath of the January 6th breach, I am also asking for the subcommittee support for a campus-wide facility assessment. During my selection and confirmation process, I promised to transform the agency. This budget request is the first step in that transformation. Additionally, last year, I promised to emphasize deferred maintenance and emergent needs required for our facilities. I am confident that this request, coupled with the changes that we are actively incorporating throughout our agency, represent a major step forward in the beginning of the future AOC and the Capitol campus. I appreciate your thoughtful consideration for our 22 budget request. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Appreciate it. We're going to start with the question and answer period, and I'll yield to my ranking member, Ms. Ferrer Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Blanton. I think that, you know, the immediate thing that jumps to mind is obviously you've got things that have to be addressed, broken pipes, destroying buildings, you know, and creating further havoc. There's those immediate kind of maintenance needs, which I want to support, absolutely. I think the next piece for me that it has been a focus has been the fact that we've got all these different layers of people looking to harden our infrastructure against any future attacks, quite frankly, and the security piece. So I'm curious if you found General Honore's report helpful, especially with regard to the physical infrastructure and some of their recommendations. What you think won't work? You know, you and I talked about you doing your assessment, and this is one of the things I asked General Honore was, so you're looking at the House side, kind of, and the Senate's looking at the Senate side. You know, the AOC wants to look at a campus-wide plan. Who's coordinating that? Who's taking the lead? Or are we just looking at General Honore's stuff as just a recommendation? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that question. My staff had worked very closely with General Honore in his assessment. In fact, many of the areas that we are concerned with, he addressed specifically. Because of the short nature and the time frame that he had to do his study, he couldn't delve into the real details and perform the real engineering work that is required to actually execute these projects. So I think his recommendations were great. However, we need to look at those across the entire campus, take what his recommendations were, perform our due diligence from an engineering so that we can actually give you budget level details so I can execute these projects and perform the proper projects to enhance our campus. Also, we need to look at additional projects from a risk perspective, not just what the threat is, but what the consequence and likelihood of that risk is, so we can do short-term mitigations to that risk and also develop a long-term implementation for what we can to secure the campus and still keep it in the way that we all want, which is to be as open as possible to the American public.
I appreciate that. Is there a way that you could keep us updated as you move forward on that. Like, it's not a once a year thing, but like the committee could get updates as you're looking at recommendations and what seems feasible, what you can do, what you can't do. I mean, I recognize you're not gonna be able to replace every single, nor will you need to replace every single window in the building, right? But some should be. And as you're adopting these things, is there a way for you to keep us updated?
Absolutely. So I view this as really as synergizing all the stakeholders' requirements, including all the security elements on the Capitol complex, as well as the Supreme Court, Library of Congress, and members, and bringing those into one, and basically having one entity that looks at all of this as a whole. So there'd be stakeholder engagement throughout the entire process.
It really seems like you are the appropriate agency for this because of that exact point. There needs to be one person or one entity looking at the whole scope and not just individual pieces. To that end, I did want to draw your attention to and wanted to ask if you guys have been able to fix. I wasn't aware that things like the garage doors in Rayburn didn't close. I assume that's been addressed. I'm grateful that the mob didn't know that there's these major areas of entrance that it was kind of shocking to me that security wise, we didn't know that. I didn't know that the west front door doesn't lock and that those are just simple plain glass. Like, that's shocking to me. Were you aware of those I mean, that's not high level stuff. That's pretty basic stuff. Were you aware of those things? And have we just failed to provide funding to bring those up to date, or?
So the garage in specific is something that we actually did know about, and it was deliberately put into the phase 4 of the Rayburn Garage project that was briefed and approved a couple of years ago. That is a great example of where I talk about deferred maintenance, where it's something that was a known issue. It was deferred maintenance, but without having the appropriate dollars that year, we lumped it into a larger project so we can get the work done. Unfortunately, this event happened before the work actually started on those garage doors actually started.
I do understand not like updating the doors, but I don't know that I was ever briefed and told that the doors physically won't close. I've never heard of, there's no, like, not being able to close your door, to me, when there are literally 3 sizes that a Mack truck can drive through, that's different than, I mean, I get that we didn't update them because of deferred maintenance, but not being able to close them is a different situation. I don't think anybody told us that.
I'll apologize if that is true.
Well, I mean, it may have been your predecessor. The other piece about the west front doors, do they lock now? Did the doors all in the Capitol lock?
Yes.
Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman.
At various levels of protection, just to want to make sure that they're not all intrusion proof.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Blanton.
So, Mr. Blanton, so all the doors will be, what are the strongest doors we have in the Capitol? Like the doors going into the House chamber from the steps, those first set of doors?
Yes, so those are built to a stronger standard, and we're getting into information that I'd be welcome to talk to you about in a classified setting, so we don't provide the public with
fair enough. Fair enough. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Mr. Blanton. Thank you for joining us again today. I am so glad that the AOC has implemented and tracked performance measures such as the energy and sustainability targets. But in the past few years, you have been short of hitting the target of building occupant waste. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about why that is such a persistent challenge and how we can help you make progress in that area.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that question because recycling is something that is important to me. Our goal last year was 44% capture of recycling products, and we got to 38%. A lot of that last year had to do specifically with the reduced staffing and the amount of paper waste that was not included in our normal calculations for what we expected for recycling. As a whole, recycling itself, we do pretty well. In fact, we generated a net revenue of $120,000 last year, even with the reduced numbers. Some of the challenges that we have, since we try to make it as easy as possible for the staff and members, when we go to single stream recycling, if somebody throws a coffee cup in the recycling bin, all that paper is now not able to be recycled.
Yeah, yeah.
And it quite often it'll happen that somebody thinks they're doing a great job in recycling their food container, they throw it in, and that contaminates the entire bin. And so we end up losing that, and we have to transfer that to a waste to energy company so they can burn that and capture the waste out of there. A lot of it's education, and I think we need to do a better job helping the congressional community on the education of that. And I think with that, we can then reach our goals.
Yeah, and there's still persistent rumors that actually none of it gets recycled and that, you know, it all goes into one bin. So I know that sort of, it's part of the education process that this is actually a recycling program. I wonder if you could also share with me a little bit about fire suppression. It is my understanding the Capitol building doesn't have a complete sprinkler system, certainly many complexities in doing that. So how are you managing the risk of fire in the Capitol?
So again, that's another really good question. And in fact, is one of our budget requests this year is to perform a design for the first 3 floors for the fire suppression system. Our current fire suppression in the Capitol itself is really a hodgepodge of systems that were put together incrementally over about a 50-year period. And that's why we really need to look at the entire Capitol and put it on one system. The events of the 6 really put that into a scary reality for me, and probably should be for everybody. If there was a fire in there, that would have been a terrible situation because we would not have had the resources nor the suppression system to suppress the fire. And to me, that was one of the scariest things once the breach happened, is if somebody decided that they were going to light something on fire, what would we be able to do to get the people out as well as prevent the facilities from burning down? I also want to emphasize that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The 6.8 million you've requested in your budget, is that that you said is for the first 3 floors? It wouldn't be enough for a full system in the Capitol.
The basement right now has about 98% coverage. So that 2% would be included in that, but it's very minor. The 4th floor is going to be done using our internal minor construction budget this coming year. So that so this design is going to take into account integrating the basement system, the 4th floor system, and doing the first 3 floors so that we'll have the entire Capitol building.
Great, and thank you. Thank you for joining us again and for all your work, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Ms. Clark. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I could take the liberty of pointing out that Ohio is the home of the largest cuckoo clock in the world. It's located in Sugar Creek, which I don't think is your district, but it's the little Switzerland of Ohio. Thought you might want to know that.
Mr. Newhouse, of all the firsts and special things about Ohio, you bring up the cuckoo clock. I find that ironic.
Yeah, well, it's a fun fact. So, well, thank you, Mr. Blanton, for being here with us today. You've got a very important job, a lot of responsibilities, and we appreciate that. I've got 3 areas of questions, and we have a short amount of time, so I'll try to talk fast. I want to ask you about the Cannon renewal project. About, I think 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, the GAO testified in front of House admin that they were expecting a total cost between $828 and $866 million. Recently, that cost is now expected to reach $890. I just wondered if you could enlighten us as to some of the reasons for the additional costs that would cause that overrun.
Thank you. So when we did alongside GAO, when we did the integrated schedule cost risk analysis, our work with them estimated that for a 90% confidence to complete the project on budget, that the actual cost would be $890. And in 2019 is when we submitted that to CHA and first notified the Appropriations Committee of such. I do want to stress, you'll notice in this budget, we have somewhat of a spike in the our budget request for Canon, and that is actually pulling money from the 23 and 24 budgets forward so we can do the award of phase 4. Without that money in 22, we won't be able to award phase 4 on time. And I want to stress that the total cost of the project has not increased over that 890 number from that integrated assessment with GA. So, but the year that we had to pull it forward this year, and it was foreshadowed last year in my testimony as well.
I see. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. So we're still on schedule to complete the anticipated date?
Programmatically, yes. No, we've admittedly, as the ranking member mentioned, we've had a very challenging January and the beginning of February. We effectively, in phase 3, we're at a stop work from right before, from January 6th through mid-February. Now, the good news on that is, yes, we were 44 days behind the schedule, but we have 2 years to make that up. This is not like it was last year during COVID when we had the hotspot occur and we lost 1,800 worker days, and we had only 8 months to make it up. So that the good news is we have 2 years to make this up. I'm confident we can remain on schedule.
Okay. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the fencing around the Capitol complex. A couple questions there. I've been told that the Pentagon is calling the shots on the fence. If you could enlighten us as to actually whose decision it is to keep it in place. Certainly a lot of us, as you probably have heard, and a lot of the community too. I've been seeing signs all over Capitol Hill, take down the fence. So talk a little bit about the plans, how long it's going to be in place, and actually whose decision that is. And also clear up some of the rumors about the cost of the fencing. I've heard $1 million a day. Is that true?
I'll address that one first. It's 1.9. The original cost is 1.9 million a week. We have since,
a week.
Yeah, we have since been negotiating with them and brought that cost down. As you may have noticed, now we are reconfiguring the fence line to allow more access on 3rd Street, Louisiana, and Washington Avenue, so that people have some of their corridors available. I'll say, without a doubt, DOD is not the one calling the shots on this. The fence line came from a request from the chief of police, and it was approved by the police board. We are actually working with DOD now, based off of their the police's National Guard request, of how much fence line we can remove with their force posture that would remain on campus, with the goal of shrinking it as much as possible and allowing as much access as possible.
So the view of our nation's capital through concertina wire is not something that we're very proud of. So is there an anticipated date of removal?
So in small increments, it started already.
Okay.
We did 3rd Street. We did 3rd Street on Monday. As I said, Louisiana and Washington Avenues, those are being done. Well, Louisiana's right now, Washington Avenue will start tonight. And then we're going to look weekly at the threat scenarios and the risk and start bringing the fence line back as much as possible. It will be incremental though. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us today, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. I yield back.
Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blanton, I guess I kind of want to go here for a second just to kind of some big picture long-term trends here. the chair started out by saying that your budget here does not reflect any specific changes from the perspective of the attacks on the Capitol. And the ranking member asked, what has changed in your budget in terms of the overall master plan as a result as well? I'm looking at your actual budget request, and I'm trying to sort through kind of where the real increases really are. And it looks to me like the great majority of the increases are in multi-year projects. You've got 90 out of, well, about half of it in multi-year projects. I think you said earlier that you were trying to catch up on 78 million of deferred maintenance, which I assume is what you're talking about there in terms of multi-year projects. I think you also said that you needed to divert monies to COVID-19 specific items. And so I'm trying to kind of make sense of all of that and ask myself, what is the real kind of combined budget here going forward? And I guess we could leave aside any specific changes that arise from January 6th that would really be single year changes, and ask in the big picture, is the bottom line challenge that you're facing the fact that we are in fact deferring a lot of maintenance on a year-to-year basis, where we're perhaps falling behind on maintenance in terms of just maintaining operating budgets, and do you anticipate, at least from what you know right now, that any changes to your overall master plan from the attack would, or for that matter, COVID-19, reconfiguration of committee hearing rooms, et cetera, that this budget would change over time? Is this kind of the big picture wish list budget, or where does it, what is your assessment of the validity of this budget as kind of a long-term guide?
Thank you. As I mentioned, so in concert with what the chairman mentioned of our increases, 181 over what was enacted last year. Our last year's budget request was 150 million more than what was enacted. So we pulled forward almost $93 million of projects, which are mostly infrastructure related projects. A lot of stuff you don't see every day, into this budget so that we can execute them. My maintenance backlog is actually, deferred maintenance is actually $1.8 billion, and that's an astronomical amount of money. And frankly, it won't be solved in a budget year, and it's going to be solved by more intelligent ways of how we manage our budget, which is why I have the Big Rock initiative, which is called Enterprise Asset Management. This will allow us to actually develop projects that will be able to look at the maintenance backlog as the return on investment and prioritize those, so I can start buying that down. The initial phases of that have started with our assessment of it, and we plan in 22 is where we're asking for resources to fully implement it. I want to stress that organizations that have implemented enterprise asset management that follow the ISO 55000, which we are going to do, those investments have an ROI of under 5 years. And so based off of what we're doing. So the other aspect of our current budget, as I mentioned, that spike in the canon where we're pulling forward, when you pull forward funds from the 24 and 25, that's $31 million right there additional that was not in the normal profile for canon funding. So when you add that up, that's effectively where the big change in our budget is between what was enacted last year and what we have this year.
Okay, and to the ranking member's question of what more significant changes are necessary or may be necessary as a result of in the long term, as a result of January 6th, and whatever implementations we make from the various recommendations. What's your response on that question? I'm not sure I kind of understood a response there.
Okay, so what I would say is first, the thing that is needed is the comprehensive security assessment. Without looking at that from the entire campus, what we are really doing is just taking a bunch of good ideas and implementing them, not putting the rigor in there and saying what is going to produce the best bang for the buck. And as I alluded to last month, I don't want to spend money to spend money. I want to spend money that produces the best result possible. And so start with that assessment, pick up the low-hanging fruit out of there, then the intermediate projects, and have that be integrated into what is our capital complex master plan that we're asking for this year, for a broad look at how we take all of these other disparate studies that were done from many things that are even unrelated, like the Capital Metro South entrance project, to transportation studies, to other security studies, to lighting studies, and put that into one package that will be able to broken up into 5-year strategic plans and allow us to give the budget committees and the appropriation committees the ability to see over the next 5 years, this is what we need to execute to meet the goals of the master plan.
Okay, and that's fair enough. I don't think anybody wants to rush projects and do it on a piecemeal basis. But while we get to the bottom of that, do you think that would impact this particular budget? In other words, are there projects within the budget that you have submitted, which is kind of a more normal course budget, that would change or be amplified, or for that matter, be materially changed or even irrelevant as a result of that master plan? So in other words, kind of what should we wait for before committing, and what should we just go with now?
So I wouldn't say any project would be irrelevant. What I would say is that there may be scope changes, probably around the edges, when they're integrating security concerns. Much like we do with ADA, we know that the Capitol complex itself is not the most accessible complex because it was built for so long. We take a lot of our long-term projects and we put a lot of the fixes for ADA in there. We would see the same thing with security. And what we would target with those is not the things that would be the immediate execution to give us the best bang for the buck, but it would be the stuff that would give us our long-term solutions.
Okay,
The book provides a flexibility for doing that, but I would see we would need a supplemental to get the immediate action items.
Yeah, no, understood. I'm talking about kind of more the long term. Understood on the supplemental. So I'm trying to distinguish between what is supplemental and what is more long term, and how does that work back into your current budget request? Anyway, my time's up, so I defer back. Thank you very much.
Thank the gentleman. Distinguished gentlelady, Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Mr.
Have the floor.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Blanton, for joining us today again. Since I'm kind of batting cleanup here ahead of the chairman, I do want to follow up on some of the questions that my colleagues have already put out there. I want to follow up on the fence. First of all, the fencing. You said it had been $1.9 million a week, but you were able to renegotiate that, and now it's less. How much is it costing us now?
So it's 1.2 a week now, and that'll depend on how long the fencing is up. As we shrink, it's going to obviously the total cost will decrease as it shrinks, but also the longer we keep it, the unit cost for foot of fencing will also decrease.
And I do want to put in a plug to minimizing that fence as much as we possibly can, and making it safer for pedestrians where we do have it, because that stretch of 2nd Street, in front of the Library of Congress or behind the Library of Congress and the Supreme Court. I mean, it's absolutely treacherous. So you've got pedestrians walking in the street trying to make that crossover over from one side of the Capitol to the other. So I think there are some improvements that can be made, even if you don't want to shrink the perimeter too much, which I hope that you will do. So anyway. So you testified that you wanted a comprehensive security assessment. How do you envision that taking place? Like, what would it be performed in-house, or would you get a third party to do it?
So we have already been working with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they have a physical security specialty center that was actually used in the General Honore study. So bridging off of what they did, and we currently have a relationship with them. So we would use them as our facilities experts, and they do this for the entire executive branch. So this is not like it's something just DoD. They do it across the entire executive branch. And so we would utilize them and their expertise that they can bring in from around the world to look at this study. And I want to emphasize that the study is not meant to look at everything from brand new, but it's meant to really take all the other studies that are out there and make sure that we can build it into one cohesive, executable strategy so that we have something that has the level of detail that I could come to Congress and say, this is what it would take to implement X, Y, and Z.
And so that would include not only the physical structures within the building, but also things like the interoperability of security cameras and upgrades to those, would it not?
So that is under the purview of the Capitol Police, and the short answer is yes, the study would do that. When it comes to the funding of the projects, it would be under their budget that they would come to you about the interoperability and total coverage of the cameras, which we don't have now.
So for things like, I understand from General Honore's report that you already had some of these recommendations in process, things like sorry about that, I've been sitting for too long, hang on. The security vestibules and things like that, that you had on order. Can you explain how those would be integrated with any kind of security that you come up with?
Yes, and so what we are doing now is we are looking at 2 security vestibules at the north and the south entrances to the Capitol building. This would get the screening of individuals from within the Capitol building itself outside of the building. So the first time that we have the opportunity to see if somebody is bringing in something that we don't allow, that they're not inside the physical confines of the Capitol building themselves. The design for these facilities is starting next month. And to be honest, the design is really agnostic of the security study, because they're going to be designed such that if we, in the security studies, for example, recommends that we have a centralized screening in between house office buildings, for example, and this is just a concept. The design would still be the same, it would just be where is relocated, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And for things like the security with the physical infrastructure and security within the Capitol itself, there are going to be times when the historic nature of it has to yield to the security concerns. So things like the windows and things like that are going to be on the block for this. Who ultimately is going to make that decision about where security begins and historic nature ends?
So the historic preservation aspect is clearly within my realm. My view of this is we want to have deference for the historical aspects, but you can't sacrifice security. For example, having 250-year-old windows there that can be broken with the lightest touch, and so we would still take deference to have it designed in a way that it looks like it's clean with the fabric of the original building, but it would still provide its intent for being secure.
Very good. Thank you. I see my time's up, so I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Virginia. Mr. Blanton, I've got a couple questions here. You were talking about the Big Rocks project, and you talked about enterprise. What would you call that? Enterprise
Asset Management.
Enterprise asset. Talk to me about that.
Yes, so that's where we look at all of our facilities, and we actually start doing things that are more into the predictive nature of facilities maintenance. So based off of known life cycles, we will be able to, with our annual inspections we currently do, determine how the facilities have been aging based off of what their life expectancy would be. And then you would take the actual maintenance that's been done by our blue collar workforce in the jurisdictions, the initial design aspects of it that we've done in our centralized, and we would be able to use services that do predictive projects. So such that we'll say we're going to replace the HVAC in the Rayburn building in these quads, because these certain areas are closest to the end of life cycle, so we don't end up having a catastrophic thing. The greatest part about this is I can target my deferred maintenance and then also be able to have our ability to articulate to Congress that should we not choose to fund this project in budget year X and delay it to Y, the cost of that would be a certain amount of dollars. And that would give you the full visibility on what the implications are for projects within our budget. It goes into more of what I want to do is being much more transparent and show you multi-years of what we were thinking in our projects as opposed to just one budget at a time. And with hoping that you guys could predict the future based off the projects we have.
I've been trying to do this for a while and try to think through this. You know, you said we had 1.8 billion in repairs that we need, or
Maintenance
backlog. I mean, we've got, and I don't know how we do this because we are the federal government, and a lot of this stuff needs done. And just looking at it, that is, the longer we defer it, the more expensive everything gets. So how can we figure out how to, in some way, finance these projects? Am I out of my mind here? But just like, there's got to be a creative way we can move these projects up, start getting them done, and get creative with how we can, save the taxpayer a lot of money and get some of this off the deck.
That's a wonderful question. We have two legislative proposals, one that allows us to enter into public-private partnerships, and that is a great tool when capital is limited, and you need to get a significant amount of work done, especially now that the cost of money is so low. Another tool is the use of enhanced use leases, and these are things that are done in the executive branch already. In fact, we just hope to mirror the same exact language they have. And as I talked about in an offsite facility where in the past we've had electrical issues and that would deal with server farms, we could have the ability through enhanced use lease to use underutilized space, put a solar farm there, provide battery backup at almost no cost to the federal government, and they have been maintained by the contractor. So this is authority that is quite commonly used in the executive branch in underutilized space, and that would then give us the ability to have 24/7 backup that we don't have at this particular time.
So the public-private partnership, what is that? Is that like a infrastructure bank or something like that?
So a public-private partnership would be that you would have a third-party entity who would actually finance it at finance the project, and based off of a fixed agreement. Probably the one that is most resonant here is the Thurgood Marshall building was built as a one-time authority for a public-private partnership, where the contractor invested all the capital, and then we leased it back from them at a rate that would pay back the building itself.
And you have legislation.
We have
That's
for both of those.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
We have legislative proposals for both of those.
Okay. Well, I want to take a close look at that. I think those are the kind of things that we need to do now. We could maybe start making some serious headway on some of this. We're talking a little bit too about the supplemental here. How long will it take us to get some idea of what a fence would cost? Like, how much time do we need to figure that out?
So I hate to sound wishy-washy. A lot of it depends on where the fence is going to be. If it's just in the Capitol Square, there's previous estimates for a relocatable fence on Capitol Square. However, those estimates, it looks like they have a very low upfront cost, but has a large tail about where are you going to store this fence, who's going to maintain the fence, how is it going to be transported, how are you going to get it up and down. Those are all things that we want to look at. When I look at these projects, I look at the total ownership cost for these. So we'll look at it over a span of time, so we can say, yes, this project may cost 20% more, but it's going to, from the initial investment, but over a 10-year period, it's actually going to cost a certain percentage less. So that's why I hate to be wishy-washy, but if we look at a fencing around the entire perimeter we have now, that's going to be very, very, very expensive. If we look at just the targeted fencing in areas that we can bring in fencing later, which is what I'm more proposing, that would have a less of an upfront cost, and we'll have to articulate what the long-term cost is for those, so that you have that agreement. I would prioritize that as something early on in our security assessment, so we can start getting this information to Congress earlier than waiting for the whole thing to be done and say, here's things that we can do right now.
Okay, well, we're gonna be asking for some help in figuring out what the costs are, the different kinds of technology with the fences and the movable ones and all the rest. So we're gonna be leaning on you for some help with trying to figure that out. Mr. Bland, I can't thank you enough. We're gonna adjourn this hearing now because we've got to go vote. I've got to go vote, and then we will reconvene. But once again, Brett, honestly, thank you so much. You've been terrific, and we look forward to working with you. And I personally feel like we're in good hands with you, and as you continue to try to guide us through this. So we appreciate your service, and please let your team know how much we appreciate it. And we'll be talking to you again real soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This committee is in recess. committee will come to order. For our second panel, I would like to welcome the Director of Government Publishing Office, Mr. Hugh Halpern, to present the fiscal year 2022 budget request. Thank you all for joining us today. We welcome you back to our subcommittee. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the staff of GPO for the extraordinary work over the past year. We know that COVID has dramatically affected GPO's workload through the pandemic and a very active congressional schedule. You and your team has continued to serve this body and ensure the members of Congress have the documents to continue our work. Mr. Halpern, the work you are providing is invaluable, and we thank you. The request is $125.6 million, an increase of $8.6 million or 7.3% over what was provided last year. I understand that your appropriation has remained flat since fiscal year 2016. I also read in your testimony that your budget has declined by 21% from a high point of $147.6 million in fiscal year 2010. I hope you might shed some light on this matter for the benefit of the committee, as none of us were on the Ledge Branch Subcommittee in 2010. While you have a reasonable request, I cannot guarantee that the subcommittee allocation will be increasing at an equal rate, and it may be hard to accommodate the full request, but we will do our best. I look forward to your testimony. At this point, I would like to yield to my colleague and friend from the 42nd state to join the union, the ranking member, Jamie Herrera Butler, for any opening comments she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Mr. Halpern. It's really good to see you. I missed seeing you on House floor, although you may not miss us. I don't know. Congratulations to the Government Publishing Office for achieving its 160th year in operation. That's amazing. Since its creation, GPO has taken advantage of the technological advances of the time to provide an array of printing services to support the needs of Congress, federal agencies, and the public. The agency's willingness to adapt to the latest technologies plays a large part in its effectiveness today. GPO's funding priorities center on creating access to congressional publications in digital formats as well as in hard copy formats. And coming from a state where we have lots of trees that produce quality timber, we're not afraid of hard copy. Specifically, you've worked over the last 2 years with the Clerk of the House and the Secretary of the Senate on initiatives to convert legacy files into a format that promotes interoperability among documents. And I appreciate that your office continues to work with the Library of Congress to prepare summaries and status information for House and Senate bills in a more widely accessible format. For the previous 6 fiscal years, GPO has maintained a flat funding, as the chairman mentioned. For fiscal 2020, you're requesting a 7.3% increase. I look forward to hearing more about your office plans, how your office plans to continue its transformation from print-centric to a content-focused publishing organization. And with that, I'll yield back to the gentleman from Ohio, the state that is the top Swiss cheese producing in the union. I yield back.
Very good. Without objection, your testimonies will be made part of the record. Mr. Halpern, please summarize your statement for the members of the committee. Once you have finished your statement, we will move to the question and answers. Please begin. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera Butler, and members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to appear again before this subcommittee to present GPO's FY22 appropriations request. At the outset, I want to thank you for your past support of GPO, and I look forward to continuing our partnership during my time as director. For the coming fiscal year, I'm requesting appropriations in the amount of $125.549 million, which is a 7.3% increase over last year. This reflects our increased costs in labor and materials, as well as specific funding for initiatives of importance to Congress and the rest of the legislative branch. When we met on this very day a year ago, I was in my 3rd month as director and looking forward to accelerating GPO's transformation into a dynamic, digital-first publisher. 2020 kept us from making nearly as much progress toward that goal as I had hoped. Last week marked the 160th anniversary of GPO's founding during the Civil War, and this week marks the anniversary of one of our most challenging years ever. Like other federal employers, we rapidly moved our telework-capable staff to work remotely while examining our other operations to figure out how we could operate safely. We had to shut down our passport line for an extended period, and our plant was operating at a fraction of its normal capacity. The pandemic had an immediate detrimental effect on GPO's bottom line. Put simply, the pandemic reduced our revenue and increased our costs. We began running monthly deficits in March of 2020 and have lost more than $30 million through this past January. Our revenue from passport production alone dropped by $92 million from FY 2019 to FY 2020. The good news is things are beginning to look up. We are safely ramping up our operations, and our monthly financials are almost in the black. We've also been able to rely on our cash reserves to carry us through the pandemic without any furloughs or layoffs. As a result of having to use those reserves to meet our regular payroll, we'll need to delay some planned investments, prioritizing those projects critical to safety or current production needs. We've also been able to largely operate safely during the pandemic. We've had only 2 known incidences of virus transmission inside our facilities, with the other cases coming from community spread. We're encouraging our teammates to get vaccinated as quickly as possible, and we appreciate the limited number of vaccinations that Congress has shared with our GPO detailees up on the Hill. We hope that we can continue that partnership as more vaccine doses become available. This would be GPO's first major increase since 2014 and is 2/3 of our FY 2010 appropriations when adjusted for inflation. We were able to keep our requests flat for the last several years by improving our efficiency, naturally reducing our headcount, and keeping our overhead costs low. However, as I foreshadowed in my testimony last year, we are losing another tool we use to manage our requests: repurposing prior year unobligated balances. This is forcing us to request additional funds if we want to continue our current pace of development and innovation. As part of our request, we're asking for increases to fund several specific initiatives. For our public information programs, we hope to add 5 FTEs to conduct enhanced outreach to our more than 1,100 FDLP libraries. We're asking for $3.37 million for continued development of XPub, our next generation composition engine. Beyond merely replacing our aging composition software, XPub is a platform that will enable new applications and allow Congress to focus on the content of its documents, while GPO can produce them in ways that look great online and in print. Some of the power that XPub promises to deliver. We're also asking for direct funding for the world's only ISO certified secure digital repository, GovInfo. This year's request of $6.8 million for GovInfo is a slight increase over what the subcommittee provided last year and would fund both infrastructure and development. We're also asking for $150,000 to support GPO's broad and ongoing efforts to defend against cyber attacks on its systems. Lastly, we're requesting $1 million to support GPO's implementation of the Treasury Department's G-invoicing system for interagency payments. Because GPO collects over 80% of its operating funds through these transactions, this project is of paramount importance. Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera Butler, members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for the opportunity to present our FY 2022 appropriations request, for all the support you and your staff have extended to us during this most challenging year. That completes my statement. I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you, Hugh. We appreciate it. Ms. Herrera Butler for questions.
Thank you. And my question is actually kind of specific to the Pacific Northwest and contracting. So when it comes to federal contracting opportunities, domestic manufacturing should always be supported when and where it makes sense. I understand that a tribe from the Pacific Northwest has reached out to GPO regarding some novel environmentally sustainable production processes that could enhance the performance characteristics of domestic groundwood pulp paper products and possibly increase opportunities for the use of such products in federal paper contracts. Obviously, I'm very interested in this. Is this something that GPO would be able and willing to look into?
Absolutely. And we've talked with the tribe as well, and we're looking forward to evaluating the products. The problem we've got right at the moment is our materials science team is not actually in the building except for those things that are really critical to some of the other ongoing projects we've got. So once everybody can get back in and operate safely, we look forward to evaluating their product.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I go back.
Ms. Ferrer Butler, Ms. Clark.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for joining us today, Mr. Halpern. I am interested, as you have managed to overcome so much of the challenges presented in the last year. I was impressed to learn that the federal depository libraries were able to smoothly transition into remote work and develop new and very creative ways of operating. Can you share some of those innovations, and do you expect them to continue past the pandemic?
Thank you. That's a great question. The great thing about our partnership with these libraries is that we learn from them as much as they learn from us. And through our Depository Library Council and other very active online fora that we've set up, there's a lot of good information exchange between GPO and our partner libraries and the libraries themselves. So that has been fantastic. One of the things that we're planning on doing in the coming year is really extending our outreach to those libraries where they are. I think it's really important for GPO to meet those customers where they are. So the 5 FTEs we've actually requested are for folks that we very much envision being out in the country. So for instance, we can have folks who may have a little bit more expertise in some of the collections that tribal libraries or libraries in the Southwest have, and actually they're going to be based in that part of the country. So we want to take some of the innovation that folks have had so far and really build on that. And I don't know about you. The last time I was in the library was at American University. I was preparing for my my confirmation, and the library today looks very different than the library I left 30 years ago when I graduated from AU. So our librarians are getting more versed in our digital products, and we're really trying to support that both by training them up on how to use GovInfo as a resource, but also on the document production end, trying to give them more data, more digital formats that they can use and they can do some really amazing stuff with.
As the daughter of a public school librarian, I'm always eager to support our libraries. But you also mentioned XPub, and I know when you came before us last year, this was something you were excited about implementing. I know you've had, this has been a tough year, but how successful do you think it was in the last year in helping meet your responsibilities? And can you tell us about your plans to further implement?
Absolutely. I really actually like talking about XPub. I think that is going to be the platform that's going to support GPO well into the future. So the last project that we were able to successfully do was the main edition of the US Code, and we were able to trim 7 months off of that project. This year, we hope to roll out XPub to both the House and the Senate as the composition engine for printing amendments, bills, and resolutions. And that work is ongoing, and we hope probably within the next quarter or two to have that deployed. And that's going to be a huge step forward, replacing our way out of date microcomp tool. But you saw some of I showed the cover of the Modernization Committee's report, which looks very, very different than any other committee report we've done. And the thing is that if you take XPub and you marry it up with our new digital inkjet presses, if Congress is willing, we can move away from some of these formats that have been around for time immemorial. To give you an idea, the average committee report, the committee report that the Appropriations Committee, this subcommittee will put out for this bill, that format has been around since GPO's inception during the Civil War. My point to the Joint Committee on Printing and the Committee on House Administration has been these technologies give us all an opportunity to take another look at how you do that. And hopefully, working together, we can make those documents more readable and more accessible for everybody.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us. And I happen to see that I have the red timer, and that since the first stoplight in the country was in Ohio, I will yield.
Oh, Ms. Clark, you get the award for being most creative in presenting the fun facts. So congratulations. The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Try to top that one now.
No, I'm not even going to try. That's but I do appreciate you bringing a little levity into the committee. It does help things a lot. Good to see you, Hugh.
You too, Mr. Newhouse.
Yes, and let me just say, Mr. Chairman, I have total confidence in Mr. Halpern's ability. Got to know Hugh in his work when he worked over here in the Capitol, and if he brought the same work ethic with him to the printing office, we have nothing to worry about, that everything is going to be managed as well as it possibly could be. So it's great to have you here, and I appreciate your presentation very much. You probably have a distinction that not many agencies in the government can claim. You haven't really asked for a significant increase in your appropriation since, I believe, 2014, which says a lot about the management of the agency. Until this year, which, obviously some extenuating circumstances that have turned everything upside down, and I appreciate that. But Hugh, in your estimation, as things get back to normal, as we return to a new normal, do you anticipate going back to the status quo of being able to pretty much be a self-sustaining agency with the services you provide? Obviously, you charge your customers for, and all of the benefits that come with that. I just wanted you to reflect on that for us, if you could.
Absolutely. And it's a great question. So as I think I mentioned, over 80% of our revenue comes from what we charge our customers. And we're most of the requests that we are making this year are for specific projects to get us over the hump, to get us into a position where our rates that we charge folks are more accurately tied to the services that we're providing. So, for instance, funding the development of XPub ultimately will benefit Congress, but it will also help us move that to a more sustainable model in the future. So the way the predecessor product was funded was they built that into the page rate. So when we charge Congress several $100s a page for the congressional record, they tried to build development costs for that product into that rate. But that didn't provide a steady stream of income to keep that product going. So what we want to do is, after the initial development phase of XPub, move that to more of a software as a service. So just like Office 365 or the Adobe suite or whatever, we're charging our customers through the Congressional Printing Fund, a fee for using that software that we can then use to keep that updated into the future, so we don't run into these problems down the road. And we want to do that with a lot of our projects. So we think that most of the funding that we've asked for has been designed in a way so that hopefully over time it will go away.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I appreciate that response. And again, have a lot of confidence in your ability and appreciate your presentation today. And Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions of Mr. Halpern. I just hope that at some point in the near future, Mr. Chairman, you can explain to us and the rest of the country why Ohio finds it necessary to have a non-rectangular flag, being one of 50 have to be different. But other than that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
It's a cry for attention. The distinguished gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In answer to that last question, Ohio considers itself a non-contiguous part of our country. And to Ms. Clark's comment, I'm going to brag too, because I'm the son of an elementary school librarian, so we have something in common there. Mr. Halpern, you started out by saying that you were in this situation because your revenues had declined and your costs had increased. And in your written report, you said, I'm focused on the cost side because I'm not sure I understand why your costs went up during COVID-19 specifically. I mean, a lot of businesses or quasi businesses, they saw their revenues plummet and their costs go down also. And I see that you talked about emergency leave as being one major consequence of that. But why? And you talked about some obvious things like having to kind of COVID-19 proof your facilities and your operations. But why did your costs go down so significantly? And I suppose the question was most of that on the labor side? Was that operating side? What percentage? Like 90% of the cost escalation was?
I can get back to you on the exact breakdown. But to give you an idea, because of our labor agreements, we have 11 union bargaining units here at GPO. Everything from our police officers to our bookbinders to our typesetters. But as part of our labor agreements, we pay everybody who is coming into the building during a declared emergency essentially double time. So that cost us more than $7 million over a period of just a few months. When you combine that with our difficulties sometimes getting materials and having to stockpile materials, have a greater stockpile of those materials than we would otherwise. We had to expend a lot of capital to make sure that we were able to continue operating. That's particularly true with our passport operations as we ramped those back up. Because of supply chain constraints, we suddenly had to change suppliers for key component of our next generation passports. And all of those things sort of came together to increase our costs. We are out of that emergency period, so we're back to a more normal labor stance and more normal payroll. Our payroll runs about $850,000 a day normally. So we're working through that. We think we've got costs back under control, but you combine those increased costs and our substantially reduced revenue, and that led us to sort of the deficit situation we've been in at least through January. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that February's numbers start to turn back.
Okay, and the requirement that you pay essentially double for people on the job during an emergency, that's a function of collective bargaining agreements?
That is part of our collective bargaining agreements and long-standing GPO directives that came out of that. Yes.
And is that separate from any kind of what was there, hazard pay or comparable pay classification, accelerated pay classifications over and above that?
No, that was largely, that particular provision, frankly, was intended for snowstorms or hurricanes or those more traditional situations where the rest of the government closes, but our folks still need to come in to make sure that the congressional record gets out to you all. So in those circumstances, it was eminently reasonable and manageable, and that, yeah, it's much like snow days for a school district. You build in a little bit and you can work with that. What we weren't prepared for is having 3 or 4 months where we had to be in that status all the time. And once we got our plan together to start our reopening process this past July, that enabled us to end that emergency period and reduce those costs and get back to something more normal.
Okay, so you talked about 7 million in emergency pay. What percentage of the overall cost decline was that? Was that 50%, 75%?
I'd have to get back to you on the exact portion. The other thing to keep in mind is that our productivity went down as well. So in order to socially distance, we had to divide the number of people we had working in the plant at any one time in half. So the key thing to keep in mind about GPO is, in the past, the way we solve problems is we throw people at them. So for instance, in the reconciliation bill, the American Recovery Act that you guys just sent us, we often, and we did in this case, assist the clerk with proofreading that to make sure that it's true and correct and accurate. Well, the way we do that is we divide that, 700-page bill into really small chunks and parcel that out to our proofreaders. Well, we only had half of our proofreaders working at any one time because that is a manual-based, paper-based process in a fairly small area. So in order to do that safely, we had to cut our number of people in half. So it's not just increased cost, it's also lowered productivity, and as a result, lowered revenue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Mr. Case. Mr. Amadei.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Hey, it's good to see you.
You too, sir.
I just want to, for the record, since we want to make sure that I didn't realize this was on the agenda, but I'll go ahead and adapt. We don't allow stoplights in Nevada's 2nd Congressional District. So we'll learn from the mistakes people made in Ohio and other places before we allow them. But anyhow, listen, I've been in that office before, and you look good there. In that older building with that old school office. That's neat stuff. That's real wood, unlike a lot of the other ones. So good for you. Listen, it's been about 6 years, I think, since I walked through the place, which I found phenomenally educational and just very interesting. So what I think we're going to do, if it's all right with you, is we'll get on your calendar to come over and spend about an hour to sort of walk through and get tuned up on some of your technology in terms of the whole deal downstairs there with passports and all that secure stuff, and get updated on your other stuff. And so we'll just do that offline. And Mr. Chairman, we'll make sure that when we get that set up, if there's any other committee members, we'll let you guys know if somebody's got the time or ability to tag along, if that's all right, Ms.
We would love that.
Okay, then we'll do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Appreciate it, Mr. Amadei. Hugh, I'm gonna just kind of open it up to you, because the couple of questions that I was gonna ask have already been asked and answered. The XPub, the GovInfo, interoperability. Is there anything, we've got a few minutes left here, is there anything in or around those issues that you would like to expand upon that maybe you couldn't with the other questions?
No, thank you for that opportunity. You know, for better or for worse, I've probably written more House committee reports than almost anybody over my 30 odd years working up there. And one of the things that I really learned was that process stinks. It's not a good process for the people who have to create the content. And what I'm trying to do here through XPub is create a system where you guys, the content creators, can focus on creating that content, not about how all the pieces fit together. So what we want to do over the next several years is build out a system where your staff can write their report in Word and do your numbers in Excel, give us those files, and we can easily get that into our system, spit that out either in print or online and in machine readable formats so that it's not just us who can use it or you guys who can use it. There are a lot of other folks in academia or other groups who can take that data and do things you and I haven't even imagined yet. And I think those are all good uses of what we can do. And we've just got to make this whole process easier. And the good news is we've got a great team here at GPO. GPO does three things, basically. One is we produce stuff, Congressional Record, the Federal Register, bills, reports, all of that stuff. Two is we make that available through GovInfo and through our federal depository libraries. And lastly is we build the tools that enable you all to produce the documents you need. And we're continuing to work with the clerk, House Ledge Council, other folks to try and figure out, are there things that we can do, services we can provide that make your processes easier? And we've got a great team here, and they've been very supportive of me as director and trying to get the job done for you all. So I really appreciate the opportunity. The other thing I would say, and let me just say, as somebody who spent 30 years up there, 15 of them on the floor, I understand the pressures that you all are under for this allocation, and we will manage one way or the other. But just keep in mind that if we can't fund these things now, we'll have to figure out creative ways to do it, and that may delay some of the projects that, frankly, you all want us to be doing.
Well, we appreciate it. We all love and respect you, Hugh. We appreciate your service and that you have you in this position. We feel very lucky. So we know we're in good hands. So we appreciate it. I want to thank the committee. We've had a busy, hectic week with a lot of hearings, and I think they've all been very productive. And we'll see you all back here next week. So Hugh, thanks again for your service.
Thank you,
Please
sir.
thank your team. This committee is adjourned.